Hey there, and welcome back. Today's story is one that's been lingering in my mind for a long time because parts of it really happened. Or at least people around here swear they did. It starts with something so ordinary, a simple house purchase, and unravels into a mystery that still gives me chills. So settle in, maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea, and let yourself be pulled into a world where every creak of the floorboards and every shadow might be hiding something more. Enjoy the story. The Hidden Room on Maple Street. Part 1. The Move. John Matthews had always considered himself a man of habits. Every morning, at exactly 6:30, he would rise, make a cup of black coffee, and watch the early news before heading out for his daily walk through downtown Columbus. For 63 years, he had lived by schedules and routines, finding comfort in the predictability of life. But lately, that comfort had begun to feel like a cage. Each day felt heavier than the last, and even the familiar sounds of the city, the honking of impatient drivers, the distant clatter of construction, the chatter of neighbors felt intrusive, almost suffocating. It was during one of these restless mornings, while scrolling through local estate auction listings, that something caught his eye. A photograph of a modest two-story house tucked away on a narrow lane called Maple Street seemed to call to him. The house looked worn but charming, with peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and an overgrown garden that suggested years of neglect. And yet, in that imperfection, John saw possibility, a blank canvas, a quiet retreat from the endless hum of city life. On a whim, and with a flutter of excitement he hadn't felt in decades, he placed a bid. The bidding process was quiet, almost anticlimactic. By late afternoon, John had become the new owner. A thrill coursed through him, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and hope. He packed his car with essentials, including a few boxes of his favorite books, his worn leather armchair, and his tools. He didn't know what he expected to find at the end of the long drive, but the thought of leaving the city behind, even temporarily, made his chest tighten with excitement. The drive to Maple Street was like moving through a different world. The urban sprawl of Columbus gradually gave way to rolling fields and shaded groves, the air cleaner carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. The narrow lane wound past towering oaks, their leaves whispering in the gentle wind, and occasional glimmers of sunlight breaking through the canopy made the road seem almost magical. As he drove, John imagined himself living here, tending the garden, painting the walls, filling the empty spaces with warmth and memories. For the first time in weeks, he felt a real sense of calm. The house itself was smaller than he expected, but held an undeniable charm. Its windows were dusty, streaked with grime, reflecting sunlight like dull mirrors. The porch sagged slightly, and the front door creaked ominously as he pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, mildew, and faint traces of decades past. Dust hung in the corners, untouched by time, and the floorboards moaned under his weight. Yet John didn't mind. He ran his hand along the faded banister, feeling the grooves worn smooth by countless hands, and walked slowly through each room, taking in the character of the space. The first day passed quietly but productively. He cleaned, repaired a broken stair, swept cobwebs from corners, and imagined how each room could be transformed with a little care and attention. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the dusty floors, John paused in the living room. He noticed a faint draft coming from the far corner, near a tall, narrow bookcase that seemed too heavy to move. The air was colder there, and for a moment he wondered if it was simply a crack in the wall or a draft from an old chimney. Curiosity tugged at him, stronger than the fatigue in his bones. He pressed against the edge of the bookcase, pushing lightly at first, then harder. To his astonishment, the shelf shifted slightly, revealing a narrow, hidden door, nearly invisible against the wall. A shiver ran down his spine. The door was small, dark, and mysterious, a secret kept for decades, perhaps longer. With a mixture of fear and fascination, John reached out, turned the knob, and gently pushed it open. Inside was a tiny room, dimly lit by a single cracked window. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight that filtered through, and the smell of mildew and old paper filled the air. It was no larger than a walk-in closet, yet the space seemed packed with memories. Old chairs were stacked haphazardly in the corners. A broken table sat in the center, and along the walls were dozens of journals, neatly arranged, their leather covers worn and yellowed with age. John felt as if he had stepped back in time, into a place that had been waiting for someone to discover it. He picked up the first journal, brushing away the thick layer of dust. The handwriting was precise, yet hurried, a strange mix of elegance and urgency. Pages were filled with meticulous observations of people, neighbors, passers-by, strangers, all recorded with exact times, dates, and locations. John's curiosity grew as he flipped through more journals. At first, they seemed like the obsessive notes of a curious former resident. But as he read on, an uneasy feeling settled over him. Some of the entries described events that had already happened, and others seemed to predict incidents with unnerving accuracy. A fire at a nearby barn, a minor car accident, a missing dog. Each event was recorded with exact detail, sometimes before it had even occurred. John sat on the creaky floor, his mind racing. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps something more. He felt a chill as he read the final entry in one journal, the handwriting shaky and deliberate. Some truths are better left alone. They are watching. For the first time in his life, John felt a shiver of true fear. He closed the journal, his heart pounding. He was not a man prone to superstition, but the air of mystery, the hidden room, the meticulous journals, it all pressed down on him like a weight he could not ignore. He resolved to continue his exploration tomorrow, unaware that this small discovery would pull him into a web of secrets, obsessions, and dangers he could never have imagined. The Hidden Room on Maple Street. Part 2. The Journals. The next morning, John awoke to the soft sound of birds outside his bedroom window. The sunlight spilled gently across the room, yet the memory of the small hidden room kept his heart racing. He brewed a cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table as the aroma filled the air. Every sip seemed to steady his nerves, though a sense of unease lingered like fog. He couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was alive, watching, waiting. Returning to the hidden room, John allowed himself a long, deliberate inspection. He ran his fingers along the spines of the journals, feeling the texture of old leather cracked with age. Each volume seemed to pulse with history, holding the whispers of lives long gone. With careful hands, he pulled the first journal from the top shelf, opened it, and began reading. The entries were astonishing. The first described mundane events, a neighbor's argument over property boundaries, a delivery of groceries gone missing, but the details were meticulous, almost obsessive. Each person was tracked by hour and activity, their words and movements recorded as though under a microscope. John felt a strange thrill. This was no ordinary diary. It was a catalog of human life, observed and preserved with care. As he delved deeper, the tone of the journal shifted. Entries began to describe events that seemed improbable, yet each contained precise dates and locations. A storm that would uproot a tree in the town square, a minor car accident at the intersection of Elm and Maple, a sudden disappearance of a local dog. John, unsettled, cross-checked these events with online news archives and library records. To his astonishment, the journals were correct every single detail. Some entries even recorded events days before they happened, as though the writer had foreseen them. A cold shiver ran down his spine. "How is this possible?" he whispered aloud. The room seemed to close in around him. Shadows deepened in the corners, and the faint creak of floorboards sounded like whispers. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and aged paper, yet he could not tear his eyes from the words. Hours passed unnoticed. John read about neighbors whose lives intersected in strange and subtle ways, events that seemed inconsequential but were connected in patterns too complex for casual observation. He read about minor arguments that escalated into legal battles, lost items that were never recovered, and people who vanished without explanation. It was as if the journals captured a shadow version of reality, one that existed alongside the ordinary world, hidden yet persistent. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room, John discovered a small, folded letter tucked between the pages of one journal. The paper was yellowed and brittle, ink faded but legible. The letter was addressed to The Observer, and it contained instructions, cryptic and deliberate. Record everything. Nothing is trivial. Some events ripple farther than they appear. Trust no one. Keep the account complete. They are always watching. John's pulse quickened. Who were they, and who had been observing? He realized he had stumbled upon something far beyond mere curiosity. He was holding a key to a hidden reality. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed from the hallway outside the room. John froze. Footsteps? Or was it the floor settling? The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Slowly, he closed the journal and placed it carefully back on the shelf. For the first time, the hidden room felt menacing. It was not just a repository of history. It was a living record, aware of its observer, reacting to his presence. Days turned into a routine of obsession. John would rise at dawn, make coffee, and spend hours poring over journals, cross-referencing events, and mapping connections. Each day brought new revelations and new chills. He discovered the names of people he had never met, events that had been buried in public records, and patterns that hinted at a hidden network operating quietly beneath the surface of the town. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, John was startled by a knock at the front door. Hesitant, he approached and opened it to find Mrs. Caldwell, a neighbor in her 80s with sharp, knowing eyes. Her hair was silver, tied neatly at the back, and her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Have you seen them?" she asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "The people who shouldn't exist?" John blinked, confused. I I don't understand. Who are you talking about? She shook her head, her expression grave. It's better if you don't know. But they know. They always know when someone finds the journals. Be careful, John. You must be careful. The warning chilled him more than any of the journals. Who were they? And what danger did he now face simply for reading? Despite the fear, curiosity held him fast. John began documenting everything, taking notes, creating charts of people, places, and events. Each journal revealed a new layer of complexity. A lost child mysteriously returned, unexplained absences, coded messages hidden in everyday objects. The more he learned, the more he realized that Maple Street was only the surface of a much deeper, hidden world. Nights became restless. Shadows moved in corners. Doors creaked even when locked. The faintest sound, the scrape of a floorboard, a whisper set his heart racing. Yet he could not tear himself away. Something about the journals demanded attention, demanded understanding, as though the house itself had chosen him to continue its record. One night, John found a journal that had not been there before, placed neatly on the table in the hidden room. Its pages were blank except for a single line written in ink darker and fresher than anything he had seen. You are part of the story now. Panic surged through him. He realized that by discovering the hidden room and its journals, he had been drawn into the network. He was no longer an observer. He had become a participant. Every decision, every movement, every choice could ripple through the events meticulously recorded in the house. From that night on, John's life on Maple Street was irrevocably changed. He walked the streets with heightened awareness, noticing details he had once overlooked. A neighbor speaking in hushed tones, a car parked too long on the corner, shadows that seemed too deliberate to be chance. The journals had shown him a world behind the ordinary, a web of influence and observation, and he was now entangled in it. Yet, despite the fear, he felt a grim exhilaration. This hidden room, these journals, the unseen observers, they had given him a purpose, a puzzle that only he could begin to unravel. And though the cost was unknown, John Matthews knew he could never turn away. Part 3. Strange Neighbors and Whispers. Days on Maple Street began to blur together. John had lost track of time, caught in the rhythm of reading journals, taking notes, and cross-referencing events. Yet the quiet town was never as peaceful as it appeared. Small oddities began to ripple through his days, subtle enough to be dismissed, but persistent enough to unsettle him. Doors he knew he had locked were occasionally ajar. Lights flickered without cause. Shadows lingered where they should not. One afternoon, John ventured beyond his property, walking the narrow street lined with towering oaks. He had intended a simple stroll, a moment to clear his mind, yet the air seemed heavy, as if it were aware of his presence. As he passed the old post office, he noticed a man leaning against the brick wall, seemingly idle but watching the street with unnerving intensity. The man nodded briefly when John passed, and a chill ran down his spine. There was something about the gaze too knowing, too deliberate. Further down the road he met Mrs. Caldwell again. She tended her flower beds, hands careful and precise, though her eyes betrayed worry. "John," she said softly, beckoning him closer. "There are things you must understand about this place. The journals, they are not merely records. They are maps. Maps of influence, of people who can vanish or appear without reason, and those who control them. They do not like new observers. John frowned. Control them? Who are you talking about? She shook her head, her fingers trembling slightly. Names matter little. You will see soon enough. For now, watch, listen, trust no one. He left her garden with a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. That evening, as he returned home, he noticed that the shadows of the oaks stretched unnaturally across his yard, the wind whispering through the leaves in a way that felt like speech. Inside, the hidden room beckoned, journals stacked neatly, awaiting his inspection. But he hesitated. For the first time, he wondered if curiosity had drawn him too close to something he could not control. Still, the pull was irresistible. John opened a new journal he had not examined the previous day. The pages were filled with meticulous notes about the town's residents, events spanning decades, and even cryptic messages like coded letters and symbols in the margins. One entry, dated 20 years ago, described a fire in a barn that had been rumored to have destroyed evidence of missing persons. Another chronicled a local doctor who had mysteriously disappeared for 3 days, only to return as if nothing had happened. John began to notice patterns. The same names appeared repeatedly, sometimes decades apart. Certain events seemed connected, linked by subtle threads that a casual observer would miss. He realized the journals were not just records, they were blueprints of a hidden society, a network influencing lives quietly and meticulously. The next day, he attempted to speak with a local librarian, Mrs. Hargrove, about old archives. The elderly woman, normally meticulous and cheerful, hesitated, glancing around as if someone were listening. You've been asking about things that perhaps should remain buried, she whispered. Some records are missing, John. Books, newspapers, letters, things that vanish, people who vanish. Be careful what you pursue. John left the library unsettled. Everywhere he turned, he sensed eyes on him, not just from the shadows of the trees or the town's empty streets, but from the very fabric of the community. Maple Street was quiet, yet it was a web of observation, carefully concealed from casual notice. At home, the hidden room became his sanctuary and prison alike. Shadows flickered across the floorboards, even when no light touched them. The journals seemed to shift subtly, as if rearranged by unseen hands, and each time he looked up, he half expected to see someone standing at the threshold, watching him. One evening, a soft knock came at the door. Hesitant, John opened it to find a young man, perhaps in his 20s, who introduced himself as Peter. He claimed to be a neighbor, recently moved into the area. His eyes were quick, darting. He asked casual questions about John's house, the street, the journals, questions too precise to be innocent. Do you collect old records? Peter asked, his tone light, yet loaded with an intensity that made John uneasy. Yes, John replied cautiously. I found some old journals, just out of curiosity. Peter's gaze sharpened. Curiosity can be dangerous here. You should know that. Some things are meant to stay hidden. John felt the hairs on his neck stand on end. The warnings were becoming clearer, more direct, and the feeling of being observed intensified. Yet even as fear tightened around him, his curiosity refused to wane. Nights became restless, filled with uneasy dreams. Faces from the journals appeared in the shadows, whispering in languages he could almost understand. He awoke to the soft sound of movement, doors slightly open, the faint scrape of floorboards. It was as though the house itself were alive, reacting to his intrusion. Despite the growing tension, John pressed on. He mapped connections, recorded patterns, and noted inconsistencies that hinted at deliberate concealment. The journals were not just histories, they were guides, warnings, and perhaps tests. And with each passing day, he realized that he was becoming more than a reader. He was now a participant in the hidden life of Maple Street, entangled in a network he barely understood. By the end of the week, John's days were consumed by observation and analysis. He noticed subtle changes in neighbors' behaviors, small signs of monitoring, a car parked for hours without reason, a stranger lingering near the edge of his property, notes left in the margins of newspapers he had once dismissed. The invisible threads of the hidden society were tightening, drawing him deeper into a story that was far larger, far stranger than he had ever imagined. Part 4. The Secret Network. John Matthews had begun to understand that Maple Street was no ordinary neighborhood. The journals were more than mere records. They were evidence of a hidden network, an intricate web of influence, observation, and secrecy that stretched decades into the past. Each page revealed new connections, missing persons, unexplained events, coded messages. The more he read, the more the town's quiet demeanor felt like a carefully maintained facade. One rainy morning, John discovered a new journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the hidden room. Its cover was darker, almost black, and the leather was unusually soft, as if it had been handled recently. The entries were different from the earlier volumes, written in a more urgent hand, with frequent corrections and underlined passages. John noticed immediately that these journals chronicled not just observations, but manipulations. Someone had been guiding events, subtly influencing decisions, ensuring that certain outcomes occurred. As he read, a chilling realization settled over him. People had vanished, neighbors, strangers, even those who had seemingly vanished for a day or two, only to return with no memory of their absence. The journals recorded everything. The precision was astonishing. Every action, every word, every glance was cataloged. And now, it seemed, John had become part of this intricate system. Determined to uncover the truth, he began to map the events and names meticulously. Cross-referencing decades of entries, he noticed patterns. Certain families had recurring appearances across the journals. Some locations were repeatedly mentioned as points of interest, and coded symbols seemed to correspond with specific behaviors or outcomes. It was as if the journals themselves were a guide to understanding the hidden rules of the town, rules that were invisible to ordinary citizens. One evening, while comparing the newest journal with older volumes, John realized that someone had been monitoring his work. Notes appeared that he had not written. Annotations in margins, underlines, and cryptic symbols seemed to respond directly to his own observations. The house itself, he began to suspect, was aware of his presence, subtly communicating through the journals. The network was not just historical, it was active. One night, he noticed a light flickering in a house 2 doors down, though no one lived there. Another night, he saw a car parked outside, windows dark, engine running silently. Every small movement in the neighborhood now seemed intentional, calculated, as though each resident was part of a larger choreography he could not yet decipher. John decided to seek information beyond the journals. He visited the town archives, searching for newspaper articles, census records, and public notices that might corroborate the strange events he had read about. The librarian, Mrs. Hargrove, seemed hesitant, her eyes darting nervously whenever he asked questions about missing persons or unexplained occurrences. She offered cryptic warnings. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. You've stepped into a story that isn't finished, John. Be careful. Despite her warnings, John pressed on. The more he investigated, the more he saw the signs. Hidden meetings, abandoned properties with clues left behind, subtle patterns in the timing of events. He realized that Maple Street was a node in a larger network, a hidden society operating quietly in the background of ordinary life. The journals became his lifeline and his burden. Each page was a puzzle, each entry a clue. He spent hours decoding symbols, mapping relationships, and predicting outcomes based on past patterns. Slowly, he began to understand the structure. Some individuals were manipulators, others were pawns, and still others were observers like him, though he was only beginning to grasp his role. Then came the discovery that chilled him more than anything else. A stack of photographs, hidden in a false panel beneath the cellar floor, depicted people he had seen on Maple Street some decades older, some the same age, yet all staring directly at the camera as if frozen in a moment outside of time. Among them were faces he recognized from the journals, but also unfamiliar individuals, people who had vanished without a trace. John realized the gravity of what he had uncovered. This was no ordinary secret society. It was a living archive of lives, actions, and disappearances, meticulously maintained and expanded over generations. And he, by finding the hidden room, had become a participant in a system he barely understood. That night, a soft knock echoed through the empty hallway. John hesitated, listening. The knock repeated slow, deliberate, almost cautious. When he opened the door, no one was there. But inside the hidden room, the newest journal lay open, a single line written in fresh ink. Your eyes see what others do not. Choose wisely. The words sent a shiver through him. He understood now. The network had noticed him. Every step he had taken, every observation, every note recorded, had been watched. And though fear threatened to paralyze him, he also felt a grim determination. He had glimpsed a world hidden beneath ordinary life, and he could not ignore it. The following weeks became a relentless pursuit of understanding. John contacted former residents, interviewed anyone who might hold a fragment of information, and pieced together the movements of those who had disappeared or returned mysteriously. He discovered evidence of covert gatherings, coded communications, and patterns of influence that reached far beyond Maple Street. The journals were no longer just records, they were instructions, warnings, and tests, challenging him to navigate a hidden reality while avoiding detection. Every revelation carried risk. One evening, he found a shadow moving in the corner of his eye, a figure that seemed to vanish when he turned. Another night, he heard a soft murmur outside his window, words indistinguishable, yet filled with intent. He realized that simply knowing the truth had drawn attention. The network was aware, and it had rules that he could not yet see. Despite the fear, John pressed on. He copied journals, created detailed charts, and noted inconsistencies, hoping to understand the full extent of the hidden society. Each day brought new insights, but also new dangers. The network was vast, older than he could imagine, and Maple Street was only one node in a chain of hidden influence. By the end of the month, John had become both observer and participant. He was no longer merely a curious retiree. He was part of a story centuries in the making, a story that demanded vigilance, intelligence, and caution. And though the house seemed to breathe around him, alive with secrets, he knew he could not turn away. The journals had chosen him, and now he had to decide how deep he was willing to go. Part 5. Escalating Danger. John Matthews awoke one morning to a strange, almost tangible silence. The usual hum of Maple Street, the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through the trees was absent. Even the birds seemed frozen in mid-flight. A sense of unease settled over him like a thick fog. The hidden room had become a focal point of his obsession, and with each passing day, he sensed that the house itself was watching him as closely as he observed the journals. That afternoon, while walking the perimeter of his property, he noticed something unusual. Footprints in the damp earth that were not his own. They led from the edge of the tree line to the front porch and stopped abruptly, as if whoever had made them had simply vanished. John's pulse quickened. Was someone watching him? Following him? Returning inside, he found the hidden room altered. Journals he had not touched were now opened. Pages flipped to entries he did not remember reading. Cryptic notes had been added in margins in a hand that was not his own. Do not trust the surface. Look deeper. They are near. The words sent a chill down his spine. John realized that the network he had been studying was aware of him, not just observing. That night, a figure appeared outside his window. At first, John thought it was a trick of the shadows, but as he focused, he saw a tall man dressed in dark clothing, standing silently under the oak trees. The figure did not move, did not speak, and vanished when John reached the window. He felt an adrenaline-fueled fear, unlike anything he had experienced. Over the next several days, the occurrences multiplied. Mysterious sounds echoed through the house. Footsteps on creaky floors, whispers in empty hallways, doors opening and closing by themselves. Items from his own life, letters, photographs, even his coffee mug were subtly rearranged. He began to question his own perception, wondering if he had lost his grip on reality. The journals, however, remained a beacon. In one particularly disturbing entry, he read about a neighbor who had vanished for 3 days, only to return with no memory of where he had been. Another described a local family whose house had been silently observed for years, their private lives chronicled with unnerving precision. The journals seemed to be alive, anticipating events before they occurred. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, John heard a soft knock on the door. Hesitant, he opened it to find a young woman standing there, soaked and shivering. She introduced herself as Emily, claiming to be a resident of the town who had recently noticed the same strange occurrences he had observed. Her eyes were wide with fear and urgency. "They know you're watching," she whispered. "I've seen it too. Strange people, things that disappear, patterns in the town. They keep track of everyone." John realized that he was no longer alone in his awareness. Someone else had glimpsed the hidden network, and yet she seemed equally trapped by it. Together, they began comparing notes, piecing together fragmented observations. Emily had photographs, recordings, and diaries of her own, which confirmed many of the patterns John had been documenting. As days passed, the danger escalated. Shadows moved in corners when there was no light. Doors creaked open with deliberate timing. Figures appeared and disappeared, always watching, never revealing intent. John found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at the slightest sound. Sleep became impossible. Every dream was filled with distorted faces, cryptic messages, and fleeting shadows. The journals provided guidance, but also increased the pressure. They contained detailed accounts of disappearances, coded warnings, and instructions that were unclear yet demanding. One line struck John particularly hard. "The observer becomes the observed. They will come for you if you stray too close." By now, John understood that curiosity carried a price. The hidden network was not passive. It was active, intelligent, and capable of influence beyond comprehension. Every step he took in pursuit of knowledge had drawn him deeper into a web of unseen forces. One night, a note slipped under his door confirmed his worst fears. Written in unfamiliar handwriting, it read, "Stop digging, or you will disappear like the others." John sat in the darkness, heart pounding, gripping the journals tightly. Fear battled with curiosity, but the pull of the mystery was irresistible. He knew that turning away now was impossible. The network had chosen him. He was part of its story, whether he wanted to be or not. Even as the danger escalated, John's resolve hardened. He and Emily began documenting every shadow, every anomaly, every cryptic message. They mapped events across time, compared journals, and began to predict movements and interactions within the town. The house, the street, and the journals were no longer separate. They formed a single, living entity. And John had become a crucial node in its ongoing narrative. The tension reached a crescendo when John realized the network was testing him directly. Objects he had once trusted, doors, books, photographs, were now part of a game he could not fully understand. The hidden room seemed to breathe, its walls closing in and expanding with the weight of history and secrecy. And through it all, he knew that one mistake could be fatal. But despite the terror, John felt a strange exhilaration. The danger was real, yet knowledge had given him power. He was learning the rules of the hidden society, decoding patterns, and anticipating movements. Every shadow, every whispered threat, every cryptic note was a lesson, teaching him how to survive, and perhaps to one day control the network itself. Part 6. The Final Choice. John Matthews had spent weeks tracing the intricate web of Maple Street, decoding journals, mapping disappearances, and observing the subtle, almost imperceptible signals of the hidden network. The house, once a quiet refuge, now felt like the center of an immense living organism, its walls breathing with secrets, its shadows whispering history, its journals pulsing with knowledge and warnings. One stormy night, as rain hammered the roof and wind rattled the windows, John felt a compelling urge to revisit the cellar. The hidden room, the journals, the photographs, they all called to him as if the house itself had grown impatient. He descended the creaky stairs, Emily trailing close behind, her flashlight trembling in her hand. They approached the far corner of the hidden room, where a false panel in the wall had long intrigued John. He pressed the latch he had discovered days before, and the panel swung open to reveal a narrow passageway, dust swirling in the flashlight beams. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle. At the end of the passage, they found an astonishing sight. A vault-like chamber filled with hundreds of meticulously organized journals, ledgers, photographs, and coded messages. Some were decades old, others seemed freshly written. The chamber was a library of influence, a repository of lives tracked, events controlled, and secrets preserved. John realized the scope of the network was far beyond Maple Street. It was a living archive of human behavior, power, and manipulation. As he examined the records, a new journal lay on a pedestal at the center of the room. Its cover was black, embossed with symbols he did not recognize. He opened it carefully. The pages were blank, except for one line, written in bold, deliberate handwriting. You now hold the knowledge. What will you do? Preserve it or reveal it? The weight of the choice pressed upon him. Preserve the secret, and he would gain understanding, control, and perhaps the ability to navigate the hidden society without harm. Reveal it, and he risked exposure not only to the network, but to a world unprepared for its truth. Entire lives could be endangered. He could unleash chaos. Emily spoke softly, her voice trembling. John, this is bigger than us. Some secrets aren't meant to be known. If you take this out, people will come for you. But if you leave it, maybe we can learn slowly, safely. John nodded, his mind racing. He thought of the neighbors, the vanished people, the patterns of manipulation he had uncovered. He thought of the thrill of discovery, the terror of surveillance, the chilling knowledge that he was now entangled in a system centuries in the making. The journals had given him power, but with power came responsibility. After a long pause, he made his decision. He closed the journal carefully, placing it back on the pedestal. The network secrets would remain hidden, preserved for those who were ready, while he and Emily could continue learning cautiously, observing the patterns without disrupting the delicate balance. The storm outside began to ease, leaving a quiet that felt almost reverent. John and Emily ascended the stairs, closing the panel behind them. The hidden room was silent once more, the journals waiting, patient, as though aware of their choice. As John lay in bed that night, he reflected on the journey. Maple Street had revealed the fragility of perception, the power of knowledge, and the moral weight of choice. He understood now that some mysteries were too vast, too intricate, and too dangerous to fully expose. And yet, the pursuit of understanding, the careful observation, the curiosity balanced with caution, had given him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. In the days that followed, life on Maple Street returned to a fragile normality. The house still creaked, shadows still lingered, and the journals waited quietly in their hidden room. John knew the network was watching, but he had chosen prudence, morality, and patience over reckless revelation. And while the hidden truths of Maple Street would remain a secret, he carried them in his mind, aware, vigilant, and alive to the subtle rhythms of a world few could see. Some secrets, he realized, were meant to be guardians of knowledge, not weapons of exposure. And in that understanding, John Matthews found not fear, but a profound sense of purpose. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. I hope it kept you on the edge of your seat and maybe made you think about the secrets that might be hiding all around us. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next incredible stories I have coming your way. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me what you thought about today's story in this format. Did it surprise you? Did it feel real? Your feedback means the world to me and helps shape what comes next. Thanks again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.